Well, hard to believe we are only on the Second Amendment, but I warned you guys there's a lot to talk about with the Bill of Rights, and with the Second Amendment, we could probably spend all day discussing it, but I promise to keep it a little bit shorter than that. Now, first, what I'd like you to do at this point is pause the video, take a minute, read the Second Amendment, and try to figure out what the Second Amendment is saying about your rights and freedoms before we move on. Okay, so here we have the Second Amendment, also known as the right to bear arms. And this amendment is all about guns and gun ownership, the right to own weapons. And in a modern sense, in today's world, when we're talking weapons, we are certainly talking guns with the Second Amendment. And there is probably no other amendment more controversial than the Second Amendment. That word controversial means that people like to argue about it. Well, maybe they don't like to argue about it, but they do argue about it. And there are certainly lots of different opinions about guns and gun violence in America. And we're going to try to stay away from that topic and just really focus on what this amendment says. Because as it turns out, if the Second Amendment just said this, then there really wouldn't be a lot to argue about. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's clear, right? The right of the people to keep guns shall not be limited or taken away. Boom, done, no arguing. However, that is not what the Second Amendment says. Well, it says that, but it says something else too. So, this is the actual text of the Second Amendment. A well regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Wow, that's a mouthful. What does that mean? Well, part of the problem here is that the founding fathers, when they wrote this, were basically talking like Yoda. They were sort of talking backwards. You know, when Yoda says, "Strong the force is" in Luke, when he could have just said, "The force is strong" in Luke, sort of flipping the word order around. So let's look at it. Let's actually flip that around, make it a little easier for you to understand. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed because a well regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state. So now that the word order makes a little more sense, we can break this down a bit further. Let me get my cursor here. My pointer. Okay, so the right of the people to keep and bear arms, to keep guns, that part should be clear, shall not be infringed because a well regulated militia is necessary. Now, militia is a term we've had before. Remember, the militia is a citizen police force, basically, during the time of the 13 colonies and in early United States history. Even at the time that the Constitution was being written, there really wasn't a police force. And so people relied on the militia, the local citizens, and their privately owned guns to protect the town or the village or the county as necessary. So that certainly made sense back then, that if you take away the right to own guns, then you won't have a militia, and therefore you will not have anyone to protect your town, colony, or state. So this portion right here, the well regulated militia portion of the Second Amendment, is often used as an argument against gun ownership in today's modern world, because today we don't really need a militia. We have a police force. We have sheriff's departments, state police, local police. Of course, that's after you make the 911 call, right? If you're trying to defend your home from a burglar or a robber or someone breaking in, there is that delay time before the police arrive. But it is an argument that the Second Amendment is no longer necessary because we no longer have the need for a militia. Therefore, citizens don't really need to own guns anymore. However, I would like to point something out, that the Second Amendment does not say this. The Second Amendment does not say the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed because a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state. Therefore, when the nation no longer needs a militia, the government can take away your guns. No, it doesn't say that part. So this argument is probably going to continue to go on for quite some time, although it has been settled, really. The Supreme Court has stepped in a couple cases, and I would say the last 10 years or so. The Supreme Court did make some rulings in some cases where some individual citizens, one I believe in the city of Washington, D.C., and the other I think was in Chicago, were not allowed to own a gun. And so they took their case, they basically sued the government, took their case to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court made a ruling, and they said that, yes, despite this well-regulated militia clause in the Second Amendment, it's still a right to bear arms for private citizens. So you can't take away people's guns just because there's no longer a militia. So that is kind of a settled fact. All right, that debate has pretty much ended within the Supreme Court. And you do have the right to own guns in America. However, there are limitations. So this is similar to the freedom of speech. Yeah, you have the right, but it's not an absolute right. So there's certain types of guns that you're never going to be able to own. They're controlled by the federal government. Things like machine guns, and sorry, you're not going to be able to own one of these nuclear cannons. Not covered by the Second Amendment. So we got to use some common sense here. So limitations are in place, and they're in place due to some national laws. There is a national law about guns that says anyone who wants to buy a gun needs to get a background check. They have to check and make sure you're not a criminal. And of course, if you are a criminal, you're not allowed to have a gun if you have a criminal record. And but beyond that, within different states, the gun laws can really change dramatically. And the analogy or the real life example that I usually give here is the state of Vermont compared to the state of New York. In the state of Vermont, if you want to carry a pistol for self-defense, you go to a store, you get your background check, you buy the pistol, and you strap it on your side, and that's it. In New York State, if you want to own a pistol, you have to go through not only the background check to buy the pistol, but before that, you have to go through a very lengthy process. It can take several months to apply for a pistol permit, which gives you permission to carry that gun. You have to carry it concealed. You can't walk around in public with it on your side. That would scare a lot of people, I'm sure. There's a lot of specific rules about where and how you have to carry that gun. So I use that example because if you were standing on the border of Vermont and you had a gun that you had purchased in Vermont and you were a Vermont citizen, and then you stepped over the border into New York, you would be arrested and you would be going to jail for like 10 years. So that is how different some of the gun laws can be from state to state. And now we have the Third Amendment. I will keep this one short for you guys. In fact, I'm not even going to have you preview it. I'm just going to explain it to you. This amendment says that the government cannot make you house soldiers in your home. And you might be asking, well, why do we have this amendment? Right? Because the government never makes you keep soldiers in your home. Well, not exactly, because there was a time period when the government did. Can you think of that time period? It's the American Revolution, duh. In fact, that's the reason why we have a lot of these amendments. If you think about some of the situations that people went through during the American Revolution, keeping in mind that the same guys who wrote the Constitution, they were the people who fought the Revolution a few years before. So they remembered when the British came and took their weapons at Lexington and Concord. They remembered when the British shut down their town meetings and refused to allow their assemblies to meet in Boston and Massachusetts after the Boston Tea Party. And of course, they remembered the Quartering Acts, when the British sent in the army and forced the colonists to keep troops in their homes as a way of enforcing all the British tax laws. So the real point to understand with the Third Amendment is there's a reason why we have these amendments. There's a historical reason because of the fact that Americans lost many of their rights to the British during the American Revolutionary period. And they didn't forget that. And when it came time to write their own plan of government, they made sure to include with the Bill of Rights protections so that their new government couldn't do the same things that the British government had done to them a few years before. Okay, let's take a look at one last amendment before we take a break. This will be the last amendment for this part of the video. And what I'd like you to do here is just pause the video and take a look at this amendment, read through it, pay close attention to the highlighted vocabulary words, which I have defined for you on the screen, and try to make some sense of the Fourth Amendment and try to figure out what this amendment means. Now that you've had a chance to read through it, let's talk about the Fourth Amendment, what I like to call the right to privacy, because this is the amendment that deals with search warrants. And that term, search warrant, is probably one that a lot of you have heard of before, maybe on television, because this amendment is what prevents the police from just randomly going through your belongings, searching your home, searching your car, searching you when they do not have any evidence that you have committed a crime. So the way this works is if the police do think that you've committed a crime, then they probably have some sort of evidence against you. And they take that evidence to a judge. And it is the judge who decides if he's going to sign the search warrant or not. If the judge feels that the evidence is good, that there's a good reason to believe that you've committed a crime, then he will sign the search warrant and give it to the police, and that will allow them to search your belongings and basically violate that right to privacy. The only way the police are going to get to violate that right, again, is through a judge and through providing some evidence to a judge that you likely have committed a crime. If the judge looks at the evidence and says, this is not good evidence, he's going to say, this is, or she is going to say, this is not probable cause, this is not enough good evidence, and they will simply refuse to sign that search warrant, and they will tell the police to go back and basically do their job and come up with some better evidence. So what would be some examples of probable cause or good evidence that would allow the police to get a search warrant? How about a trail of blood leading up to your porch? A severed head hanging in your window? 3 witnesses that saw you rob a bank? Yeah, I would say that's probably pretty good evidence. Your fingerprints on a murder weapon? That's probable cause. Now, what would not be probable cause? Your aunt's, uncle's, best friend's, cousin's tweet saying that she thinks you did it. That's not going to be probable cause, and the judge is probably going to send the police back again to do their work, to do their job, and collect more evidence. So this is an important right. It goes back, like many of the other amendments that we've seen so far, it goes back to the colonial period, back when England was in charge. Some of you might remember the writs of assistance, which were these papers, these basically a permission slip that allowed the British to search anyone's belongings at any time. So like some of the other amendments that we have looked at, this is one of those amendments that was written specifically in mind with what the British had done to the Americans in the past. They did not want their own government to be able to do to them. Okay, so that's the end of our video here, Amendments and the Bill of Rights, video number 3, where we covered the Second Amendment, the Third Amendment, and the Fourth Amendment. Please be sure to complete your Google Forms quiz. That is a separate assignment from the Edpuzzle assignment. I do expect that you complete the Edpuzzle video, that you watch that video, answer the questions, but when you're done, I still need you to complete the Google Forms quiz because that is how I will be grading you on the questions. And I will see you next time in video number 4, where we will move on to the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, and the Seventh Amendment. See you then.